Hi, friends, and welcome to episode number 4 of VCU Gerontology Community and Continuing Education's Compassion Fatigue mini-series. My name is Caroline Williams. In our last video, we discussed what risk factors, either personal or external to ourselves, can put you at an increased risk of developing compassion fatigue. If you haven't already, definitely give that video a listen, and I challenge you to reflect on how many risk factors you can identify in yourself. However, today we will really be getting into the nuts and bolts of what can lead to compassion fatigue. The first episode of this series talks about what compassion fatigue really is and how it's been described in the research. So to review, compassion fatigue is typically defined as the physical and emotional exhaustion that can occur when we are continuously providing a caring response or empathizing with people who need our help or have experienced trauma. But at the same time, we know that compassion is a very human characteristic and actually really important for the people we're helping. And compassion is really important for our own well-being as well. So what's the deal? How does such a strength like compassion take a turn towards something that makes us exhausted? This is exactly what we're going to dive into today. I like to think of these causes as upstream or roads that lead to compassion fatigue. Okay, so there are 3 main roads that lead us to compassion fatigue. These roads either work individually or they can merge together to lead us to this emotional exhaustion. Let's start with burnout. This term is commonly used interchangeably with compassion fatigue. And although they are related, burnout is a subset of and a potential avenue towards compassion fatigue. Professional burnout can arise when demands exceed available resources such as time, materials, and energy. The World Health Organization describes burnout as a syndrome from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Burnout is characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or negative or cynical feelings related to your job, as well as reduced professional efficacy. So when you are overextending yourself because what is required from you is not being adequately supported by enough resources, you can feel burnt out. The second road that leads to compassion fatigue is known as secondary traumatic stress. So most of us have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, but you might not have heard of secondary traumatic stress. So secondary traumatic stress occurs when you are working alongside individuals who are currently or have previously experienced trauma. Trauma responses like emotions of rage, shame, fear, or dissociation from a traumatized patient or person or their family can be transferred to the person attempting to provide caring services. So as humans, the part of our brains that light up from experiencing trauma begin to match that of the person that we are helping. Secondary traumatic stress affects both the person experiencing it and the ability for them to be able to help others. Okay, so far we've talked about burnout and secondary traumatic stress as the two of the main roads that can lead to compassion fatigue. The third road is what's called moral distress. So moral distress has not been talked about as much in research related to compassion fatigue, but we think it's really important to address here and something that I personally believe contributed to my own experience with compassion fatigue. So let's get into it. Moral distress has to do with your personal values. So what is important to you? What do you prioritize? Examples of values can include integrity, honesty, or even compassion. If you're a helper and provide care either in your personal or professional life, you probably have certain values or priorities that are important to you. Moral distress refers to the suffering and internal conflict that you can experience if you're acting in a certain way or witnessing others act in a way that goes against these values. Or if you know the right course of action, but you're unable to take it. You can start to feel guilt, shame, anger, even a loss of purpose, and ultimately can develop compassion fatigue. An example of this is if you work in a long-term care facility that requires you to work with several people at a time, and you don't have the time that you would like to spend with each person to provide a comprehensive and compassionate response. And it makes you feel that you are not acting in alignment with your values. Or if you know a person would benefit from a certain intervention or action to decrease their suffering, but a lack of materials, time, or energy limits your ability to give it to them. Continuous instances of moral distress can lead to a more severe version of this called moral injury and can contribute to compassion fatigue. So to wrap up, there are three main roads that we discussed that can lead to developing compassion fatigue. Burnout, secondary traumatic stress, and moral injury all can play a part individually, but more often together to cause that emotional and physical exhaustion. So what rings true for you? Jot down your thoughts or even start a conversation in the comments. We would love to discuss this further. For our final video, we will address compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction. And we will use compassion satisfaction as our strength.